Think modern, think in the future, dream a little bit. You're at that age where anything is possible, and it's up to guys like you at 16 years old now to start thinking far out and innovative, like what would you want a car to be like in the future. Welcome back to another episode of Critiquing Your Designs. We haven't done these for a while. I really enjoy doing them. It allows me to put myself into your shoes, what you're feeling at the moment in terms of being able to render, to design, to sketch a car, and feel like it's worthy of submitting for entry into a design university perhaps, or just a hobby. Anyways, it gives me that chance to give you a small critique on your design, try to help you and others who might have the same issues to progress, become a little bit more confident. And so without further ado, let me get into the first one. Dominic Palach. Dominic Palach is 16 years old. He is from Croatia. He says that he does all his sketching with a Bic pen. Great for you, Dominic. It's a great way to start. I would recommend it even for the most youngest designer. Throw away your pencils, throw away your erasers. Start with a black medium point type Bic pen. Nice side view for a 16-year-old. I can already see that you're at a great level because you've got pretty much very classic, very correct proportions on your design here, using pretty much the right proportion in terms of keeping wheel spacing on a vehicle like this. It's a two-door coupe, so we're looking at something fairly sporty. You've got something quite credible to begin with. You've got something that shows a certain amount of front overhang. That's the distance from the center of the front wheel all the way to the furthest forward point of the bumper. And you've got the same thing going on here. That's your rear overhang. And you got a good enough distance between the wheels. You could increase it a little bit more, but typically we're looking at something at about 3 wheel spacing. You've almost managed that, so probably want to pull that rear wheel or that front wheel forward, depending on what you're looking at, type of vehicle. The most important thing right now in terms of what you've shown here is something we call the ramp angle. Now the ramp angle is that lowest point on the front bumper going back to the center of your rear wheel where it touches the ground. That will determine what we call the ramp angle. Now that angle is important and critical because when you're going over a bump or you're going over the ramp in a parking garage, you want to be sure that that front bumper is high enough not to be damaged. But typically you want to aim at something around, let's say 8 degrees, 9 degrees. So keep that point fairly calculated. When you go straight up like that, you pretty much are not putting a bumper on the front, and the front fascia, as we call it, becomes the bumper of the car. Everything is pretty much in the right height, in the correct height, except for the point above your front tire. Now, this is something that typically is a fault with a lot of beginning designers. They don't allow enough suspension travel above the front tire. So what you typically want to do is keep that point above the front tire at a height that will typically allow you a lot of movement. So you're going to need to raise this point maybe up to something around in that area there. Always remember that it's a good thing to keep the highest point of the front fender directly above the center of the front wheel. Now, as you come back, you've done something very nice here, which is showing the tire on the opposite side. Perspective means that you will always see slightly from this view the tires on the other side of the car. And you've shown that through making this part here a little bit darker, so that's fine. What you probably could do to improve it is to raise the ground line underneath the car to about something like that, so you see a little bit more of the ground underneath the vehicle. What you have coming through here is something very much, or let's say similar to a 612 Scaglietti, which is a inverted surface or a concave type surface where you got it going in, it's scalloped out. You want to be sure that if you do something that strong on the side of a vehicle, that has some type of correlation throughout the vehicle. So you've only done it on the rear here of the tire into the door. You'd probably want something happening with that feature line on the front here, just as a starting point, make it flow through the vehicle. As we come back behind that, you've got a very, very strong rear fender, very sensual in that sense here. But what you don't have, being very critical, is the intake being very let's say equally central. You have a very almost sharp bite coming out here. And that's a little bit too dramatic perhaps, and also lifeless in the sense that when you do a curve on a car, much like you've done here, or you've done here like that, it's symmetrical. And when we try to do dynamic design, we tend to give a little bit of offset to the curve. So it looks like an accelerated curve. Now, accelerated curve is some kind of line that actually speeds up or does the opposite, slows down. So when you have something that's symmetrical like that, you're gonna have something that's a little bit lifeless. So what you would wanna do is probably accentuate that design by going with an accelerated line. And also with this one here, you probably would want to accelerate it like that a little bit more. So you get something that has a little bit more of a speedy curvature to it. You would want to introduce a reflection on the glass just to show that it's glossy. The way you would do that is throw a reflection on the glass. And all that is the horizon line of what's happening behind you, and it's reflected into the glass. And you would darken that up. You can be quite loose with it too. You put a couple swoops in there, and then you can show it to be the things that are occurring behind you. If you want to get in a little bit tighter than that, you would start to darken the area where you would have, for example, the B-pillar and the seat in this area, at least the shoulder area of the seat, perhaps the steering wheel here, like such. Okay, next step would be to bring in some highlights perhaps, and you can use that either with whiteout or Tipp-Ex or even gouache with a paintbrush if you want to be very precise about it. All in all, I think you've done a great job here for 16 years old. You should be very proud of this. I think it's a great step, first step perhaps, but great first step. And I think you're on to being able to design much better in the future. Cars that are more, let's say, more futuristic than this perhaps, but it's a good starting point, Dominic. So congratulations and keep pushing, man. Okay, let's move on to the second submission. And this one is from Wilson and Wilbert Liao from Malaysia. Now, Wilbert is the son of Wilson. Wilson is 6 years old, and he's been designing cars since he was 5 years old. His father, Wilson, is 37 years old, and apparently he's been trying to help his son become a better designer. Now, the other thing I would say right off the bat is you're not going to escape the eyes of a professional designer. I can see the basis of this design immediately. This would be your 2018 Mercedes-Benz AMG GT Coupe. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. At any rate, it's not cheating because you're not getting paid to do these sketches for a professional company. So whatever it takes to get that first step, that first bit of confidence of developing your design skills, be it using something that exists already and putting a piece of paper, transparent paper over it and copying it, that's fine, because one day you'll be professional enough to be able to do that in the sense where you feel comfortable creating your own designs. But in terms of what you've done here on the paper of designing this car, there's not a lot to critique. And the only thing I can actually say is that if you're a professional already, Wilson, and trying to teach your son the skills of an automotive designer, note, please, that when designers design cars, at the first stage, we use what is called line quality, which means that not all your lines have the same intensity or same darkness. There's a feel when you design freehand sketch style. That means that things that are towards you a bit darker, that things that go away get a bit lighter. It's not only in design, it's in painting and things we see in the landscape. What I'm saying is that a lot of your lines here, or most of them actually, have the same strength, the same intensity, which then makes the sketch seem to be very flat, very one-dimensional. The second critique perhaps is your shading technique. You're using here basic crosshatch, which is all the same consistency throughout, so that's not giving you any feel of distance. I'm just using this pen here to demonstrate quickly that this area here needs to be much darker, and as it goes in that direction, it becomes lighter. Same with your intake here underneath. Make sure this is almost black or very dark compared to this one here. You want this to actually be much stronger And as you go in that direction, which is further away from you, it becomes lighter. Also the wheels, you don't want to just outline things like that. It's color that gives you the shape, not the lines. The other thing is your shading here is not very representative of anything. You have a few smudges in here, which tend to highlight the form, but not enough. And if you're going to do that, add perhaps more extensive shading to the car. The car doesn't appear to have any paint or any gloss on it. So that's something that you can accomplish with high contrast. So you can have blocks of color and then shading. So this area perhaps would be shaded. This area would have a reflection through it. And you manage the reflection such that when the surface changes, it grabs sky. It grabs light reflections from the sky. So your solid reflections will always be facing horizontally. And then your light reflections, the ones that are almost faded or almost airbrushed, are the ones that are the surfaces that are pointing upwards to the skies. The other thing is when you're drawing a car, remember that it's not flying, that it actually sits on the ground. So you need a shadow underneath the vehicle to ground it that will plant it on the paper. But in general, the car starts to look right. As you've done in here, again, it's very obvious that this is a MB AMG GT, but again, you've changed some of the areas here, or actually eliminated some of the design details and some of the surface entertainment things that we have. What I would do is probably take it to the next level here. Stop making such hard lines. It almost, well, I would swear it was done with a pencil. It's losing the sketch quality of Wilson and Wilbur. You need to be a little bit more sensitive and bring in a lot more a line feel or character to the design. It looks like you might even base this off of a design sketch of the vehicle rather than actual photograph of the real car, because the proportions are a little bit more leaning towards the sketch side, where we try to exaggerate the proportions to make the vehicle look a little bit more dynamic, which it certainly does here. Thank you so much, Wilson. Thank you so much, Wilbert, for both contributing to giving us something to critique in terms of being able to bring that level up a notch. I'm expecting to see something perhaps in the future. You can DM me anytime you want. Show me what you would do if you took in those tips and would be able to take the sketch to a higher level than what you're showing here. Many thanks, appreciate it. The next critique comes from Braden Miller. Braden Miller from Iowa. Braden, you're 16 years old. Good. Wow. And you're asking me to please let you know at what level of sketching you're at. So what do I think? Wow. Well, let me tell you from this first sketch that I'm looking at here, if I could have done this at 16, I'd probably be retired by the time I was 40. Like I just mentioned to Wilson and Wilbur, you can't fool an experienced designer, because what I'm looking at here is obviously done over the sketch of another vehicle or the image of another vehicle that actually exists. So again, I'm not critiquing you for doing that, because it's a great way to learn. I did it too when I was very young, but actually it wouldn't copy over top of them. I put them in front of me and try to make that mind-hand connection where what I saw, I was able to sketch here, because putting it on top and sketching it is really not taking a lot of mind power or creative power. Basically, it's being held by the hand. So when you're using an underlay, it's allowing you basically to easily or lazily sketch, because you're not in control of actually where does that line go. It's given to you. It's kind of handed to you on a silver platter. And again, if you're 16, you're still at a young stage, and that's not a bad thing to learn basically control of the pen, but it's not giving you the basic wiring that you need in your mind of how do I see something and put it onto a piece of paper. But you have a second drawing that you've included here underneath, so I'm going to look at that, and hopefully I'm not looking at another traced drawing, and this will show you. Brendan, this is showing me your level currently. I do really appreciate the fact that you've tried to make a perspective drawing that is incredibly difficult at your first stage of designing to get right, because most often when we try to do our first, when we attempt our first perspective drawings, the car ends up looking like it's been in a wreck. You've pretty much got the right idea in terms of what we call the vanishing point being in the correct position and all your lines going to those vanishing points. So you want to do that. And that's always something that basically you can calculate yourself. We tend in the design profession, especially in the automotive design profession, to exaggerate the vanishing point. We pull it a lot closer to the vehicle so you get a lot more of a sort of a fisheye or a wide angle view to the car that shows a lot of the car in a very minimal amount of space. And what I mean is that if I was to put the vanishing point of your lines, it would probably end up here, whereas I typically, in the way I sketch, I would end up putting it much closer, so your lines tend to be a little bit more quick and dramatic. What you really, I can't say it enough, to get right before you even start to finish the drawing is your wheel ellipses, and you've got them all over the place. This car really has been in an accident before. So what you want to do is understand the rule of ellipses when you draw cars. And you can only do that by doing it and doing it and doing it to a point where it just becomes natural. At the moment, you might think these are okay, they're not. If you're going to continue those lines of everything going to your vanishing point, as you have here, draw one that goes through the center of your wheel. So wherever you decide to put the wheel on the car, you've got it here, draw a line that goes through that center to your vanishing point. So if I was to draw it here, my vanishing point is going to end up somewhere along there. Now you see that line right there is critical. If I was to do it with the front wheel, here's your center. I'm going to draw a line through the center to your vanishing point. So that is about there too. So remember these 2 points here, okay? Now what you want to do is you want to take, and that's going to be what we call the minor axis, and you're going to have another axis which is 90 degrees to that called the major axis. The minor axis is the small axis on an ellipse, and the major axis is the long axis on an ellipse. So basically you're thinking 90 degrees to that is about like that, right? And 90 degrees to this one is about like that. This is already a starting point. Now see, what you've got is your minor axis here on your wheel is here to here. I'm going to draw it in faintly. And your major axis is the longest axis, which is that one. So that's nowhere near what I've drawn. So remember that the main axis, the major axis, is going to be longer, and you're going to do something, and I'll try to draw it. Well, if I draw it fast, I'm better than when I draw it slow. So we're talking about something more like that for the rear wheel, and for the front wheel, we do that. Let me get it right, hold on. So it's more like that. Now you'll see that they're not actually parallel or anything like that, but that's because of the perspective of the drawing. So now we have the wheels with the major axis going that way, minor axis going that way, and basically the width that you determine of that point, that point, that point, and that point is up to you. But it takes a feeling, and that's what I'm telling you about. The more you do it, the more you're going to get that feeling for what is correct. Because I could make that a lot smaller, a lot more narrow. But the ellipse, the construction of the ellipse, of the wheel, has to be 90 degrees. You have to have that minor axis going to the vanishing point in tune, in agreement with all the other vanishing points that are going on. Your line here on the side, what we call the belt line or the waistline, is very flat. So if you looked at this car from the side view, it would be purely horizontal almost, and that's not a good thing, because then the car doesn't look like it's, you know, pulling at the leash and wants to get going. A very horizontal line. Your front glass, we don't do flat glass these days, we give curvature. So you're going to want to put in some curvature like that. You're also probably going to want to add the curvature here. Now, we used to put curvature in like that on the top of windscreens, windshields, but nowadays we're starting to increase the amount of curvature on the glass and also the angle. So if you're going to pull in, and I'm just drawing a center line here, and you're going to give it that kind of curvature, you'll want the top edge of the glass to actually go up and over. So you're going to introduce glass that actually goes in the opposite direction. So you have glass that actually, when you look up, you know, a better vision angle towards stoplights, towards the upper areas of things, just helps to introduce more glass nowadays. And then one last thing, Braden, before I wrap this up, is the mirrors. Today we have rear view mirrors mounted on the side of the door, on the side of the A-pillar. In the future, when you get to be, say, 25, 30 years old and you're designing cars, I bet you that you're not going to be drawing mirrors like you have them here. These mirrors are the most archaic things that we have today, and there better be some innovation coming on in the next few years, because if not, cars are going to look old forever. Try to think about eliminating mirrors so that it becomes almost a non-design. Remember that we don't like door handles because they're clunky, they add to the surface, and they're kind of like old things that you have on doors. A lot of doors today, you walk up to them, they just open up and you go in. Think modern, think in the future, dream a little bit. You're at that age where anything is possible, and it's up to guys like you at 16 years old now to start thinking far out and innovative, like what would you want a car to be like in the future? Great for a starting point. Again, don't take it too harsh on the first one where you've just pretty much copied the car. That's a good starting point. But on your second sketch, my respect and congratulations for being able to draw a car in a very interesting viewing angle, a perspective that tells you a lot like that. It's just taking it to the next step, refining it. And there are a lot of ways to start improving that, even after you do get the perspectives right, which is then translating reflections to the surfaces and highlights to make the car have absolutely stunning surfaces, stunning highlights, stunning shapes. And you can start to imagine and be a lot more creative. So it's like learning music. If you start with the basics and you get the basics down, then the creativity starts to kick in and you can start doing it your way. So that's the most important thing as a designer. Your way, your vision, your view of innovation of the future. Thanks very much. Thank you everybody for watching this episode. I hope it helped you a little bit. Give me your feedback. Let me know what you want to see. Give me your reactions. Let me know. I read all your comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the future.